Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth edition of Finding Our Freedom. As this is the first edition for 2026, I want to start by wishing everyone a peaceful and purposeful year ahead, especially with all the uncertainty that this year has already thrown on us. Again, I want to thank Ms. Sandra Hill and her team for supporting me and my team in making this show happen. Finding Our Freedom is about the positive political and socioeconomic change that we need to see in the Caribbean and how to make it happen. We aim to transform how Caribbean people understand the challenges in this region and empower everyone with actionable solutions to drive real change in our communities and our countries. The title for this show, Finding Our Freedom, is based on Nobel laureate, development economist Amartya Sen's definition of socioeconomic development as the progressive removal of various unfreedoms. He suggested that freedom is constitutive of socioeconomic development. Now, freedom comes from self sufficiency. So, we will be exploring the ways in which we as Caribbean people can secure greater levels of freedom via strengthening our own self sufficiency on an individual and a collective level. Freedoms also require and depend on everyone taking responsibility. So, we will explore the ways in which we as Caribbean people can live more responsibly and can hold our leaders to account for delivering on their responsibilities. On this episode of Finding Our Freedom, we discuss the British Virgin Islands as they progress on their journey towards freedom and independence from the United Kingdom. And to share their journey, joining me today is a long-standing friend, the Special Envoy of the Premier of the British Virgin Islands, Mr. Benito Wheatley. Benito, welcome to Finding Our Freedom.
Thank you so very much, Marla. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, and thanks for making the time to join us today to discuss this very important issue for you and your people in BVI. Unlike anybody else in the Caribbean, you all are on a journey that's quite unique at this point in time. And so I wanted to start the discussion by asking you to give us some background on how the relationship between the BVI and the UK has evolved or devolved over the past decade or so.
Yes, Marla. The relationship between the BVI and UK is a complex one. We are a British overseas territory, which means we are not independent. However, we have a high degree of self-governance, but yet we are still a colony. Our political system is essentially a mixture of democratic governance and colonial governance. And these two things don't mix very well, as you can imagine. So there's often friction, although we have had a good partnership and balance over the years. But recently, things have come to a head on different occasions on issues such as governance, financial services, and other issues. Marla, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, I'm not hearing you. We've lost you, I think.
Oh, okay, no, sorry, I muted myself. Silly me. Thank you for letting me know.
Mhm.
But as I was saying, that we have quite a number, actually, in the Caribbean, of the 36 territories that we have in the Caribbean, the majority are non-sovereign jurisdictions. And a lot of people don't know that. So the BVI is not unique in not being fully independent. Um, and generally, we do see from time to time various jurisdictions sort of raising their heads and agitating for independence, and lots of sort of domestic conversations take place, and in the especially around election times. I've seen that happen a lot in the Dutch jurisdictions, for example, and and so just walk us through, give us an idea, especially since it has, a country in the Caribbean hasn't gained independence since the 1980s. I think we talked about St. Kitts being the last one. What is involved from a legal and constitutional standpoint for BVI securing its independence?
Okay. Well, let me give you some background on
Mhm.
self-determination in the BVI. This year marks just about 75 years since the BVI took its first modern steps in self-governance.
Oh,
We had terrible conditions in the BVI in the 1940s. And in 1949, the people mobilized and had a great march, the Great March of 1949,
okay.
against colonial neglect by the UK. And out of that, we were given a new constitution in 1950, where the Legislative Council was restored. It was previously taken away from us at the turn of the century, about 1901 or 1902.
Okay.
And because of that, the BVI became the poorest part of the Leeward Islands colony. Of all of those presidencies in that
Wow.
colony, the BVI was the poorest. So,
So social conditions were really poor.
yes, there were no hospitals there. We had a small cottage clinic that could not do very much for our people. And the BVI
Okay.
has 60 islands and keys, and people on
Mm.
about 5 islands. And so there was not health care that people could get. There was no real economy. Many persons had to go to the US Virgin Islands or the Dominican Republic or other places to find work.
Hmm.
Under British governance, colonial governance, everything had stagnated. So our people
Mm.
protested for the right to govern ourselves. And that journey began 1949 and then formally in 1950 with the legislature.
Okay.
We then laid the basic foundation for our society. We began cutting roads, uh, upgrading schools. Most of the schools were just in churches or in small shacks. That's how bad the situation was. But once
Wow.
our people had their representatives, which came with elections, 1950, 1954, and so on, they then began to put things in place. And in 1967, we then were given a new constitution that introduced the ministerial system. So for the
Okay.
first time, we had executive authority. Prior to that, legislature was comprised of local legislators, but the governor, the British governor posted on the islands, was the executive authority. In other words, he was the minister for everything. Our new
Mm.
constitution in 1967 then gave us ministerial authority. So we had our first chief minister, the late Honorable Lavity Stout, and we had a number of other ministers. And one of the first things that administration did in 1967 was to introduce universal education for everyone. Because under the British, it was a system of just at most 25 students allowed to go to high school. That was
Oh
it.
my.
So he made the decision with his government to build a full secondary school where all the students on Tortola that wanted to go to secondary school could attend. Because prior to
Hmm.
that, after you finished seventh standard, most students had to just work elsewhere or find something to do. So that
Oh.
changed. So our people began the journey of improving their education at the high school level, uh, essentially in 1967. Now, economic development began to take off in the late 1960s as a result of the work by the government. But we entered a deep recession in 1971 because we had a very bad situation where a developer from the UK wanted to own a lot of the properties in Road Town, which would have excluded our own people. So
Okay.
we ended that, which stopped the works that were happening. So economic development slowed, and we went into very deep recession. But between 1971 and 1978, the government was able to pull itself out of that recession because they were very prudent in their financial management.
Okay.
And we went from a recession to a surplus of $1 million for the first time in 1978. That was under the late Chief Minister, Dr. Willard Wheatley. And as a result of that good financial stewardship, the executive authority for public finance was given to Chief Minister Wheatley and has remained BVI government ever since. And so the finance portfolio is now with the local government, has remained that way. Grant and aid in the BVI began in 1956. And
grant and, sorry, can I interrupt you there? Grant and aid?
Grant and aid, UK grant and aid,
Okay.
international aid. So aid from the government began in 1956. And in 1978, with the surplus, it ended.
Okay.
And the BVI has never received any monies from the UK or anyone else for our budget. We are completely self-sufficient now for over 40-something years. We receive no money from the UK for our budget. We fund ourselves entirely. And this financial independence, this economic independence, is a reflection of our continued drive to be self-governing. So we have had a period from 1949 up until today where we continue to press for more responsibility. The governor at this time still has constitutional responsibility for internal security, the public service, administration of the courts, and the UK is responsible for external defense. But the next stage in our journey must be to assume responsibility for these other areas. And we continue to work toward that.
Okay, so just to be clear, when you're hit with a natural disaster, we've had hurricanes and storms and so on that come your way almost every year. Are you saying to me that there is no assistance from the UK even in times of natural disaster catastrophes?
We were struck by Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Maria in 2017.
Yes.
And the UK did provide humanitarian assistance.
Okay.
But in the reconstruction phase, the UK did not provide financial support directly to the government for reconstruction. What the UK offered was a loan guarantee on which to borrow over $400 million for reconstruction.
Okay.
However, they tied political conditions to it, which made it very problematic. In other words, they tied getting this loan guarantee to rolling back some of our autonomy. And that was very problematic, and we were unable to renegotiate, and eventually it was off the table. So we have taken the past 8 years using loans that we could get from CDB, about 100 million. And recently we borrowed again another 100 million. We've taken the time to rebuild the country, but it's taking longer than expected because we don't have the resources necessary to build everything up at the same time. So we, in the event of a natural disaster, it is a political decision as to whether the UK will help us to rebuild or not. Their claim was that because of the OECD DAC rules, they could not use their funds directly to assist us. Apparently, there's been some adjustments to the DAC rules that if you are devastated and your GDP per capita drops to a certain level, then you can get assistance. But the reality is that if the UK really wants to, it can take monies from other budget lines besides its international development budget that can be used to assist us. And we know that because they did it for Anguilla. Anguilla was given a grant of nearly $60 million US for their reconstruction. And if you go to Anguilla, you'll see that they have a new port, new airport, new this, that, and everything else. And they have benefited from the UK grant for reconstruction. We were not provided such a grant by the UK.
Because is it also because Anguilla is not pressing for autonomy?
Well, it was a political decision influenced by the relationship between certain political actors involved with Anguilla and the UK government. That was what determined that. We, unfortunately, were not politically tied into the UK government in the same way, and therefore we did not have an exception made for us.
Right. And then, of course, Anguilla is benefiting from .ai, that domain that, just sort of it's a windfall for them. But tell me what, in your view, and this is actually, it was a question that I had for you, but it also came in from one of our audience members in terms of what is the most difficult step or steps, hurdles involved in actually, from a constitutional standpoint, securing your independence. What does that look like?
Okay, let me just mention a few things. Mm-hmm. In 1946, the UK agreed that the BVI would be placed on the UN's list of non-self-governing territories. There are currently 17 that remain. All of the Caribbean overseas territories are on that list. It's a list that is put in place by the UN General Assembly. And it is there because it is meant to assist those 17 members via support from the UN and the so-called administering powers to help them get to the stage where they can make a decision about their political future, the process of self-determination.
Okay, so the UN is involved in this process of preparing the BVI as well as other territories for their independence.
Well, yes, self-determination and achieving a full measure of self-government. And achieving a full measure of self-government, according to the UN, can be one of three things. It can be independence. It can be a free association. For example, you have that between New Zealand and the Cook Islands. Or it can be integration, where a territory decides to become an integral part of another state. So, for example, Guadeloupe and Martinique are integral parts of France. Right. They don't have the same status as the BVI, which is an overseas territory that has whose final status is undetermined. But according to the UN, the people of the BVI have the right to self-determination, as well as any territory on that list of 17 non-self-governing territories. And there are certain obligations that the UK has under the UN Charter to us. They are to assist us with the development of our free political institutions. They are not to take control of our economic or natural resources. They are not to interfere with our culture that defines us as a people, but they are supposed to partner with us to assist us in establishing self-governance and getting to the point where we can make a decision on our future. So one of the things that the UN does via the UN Special Committee on Decolonization, which is the UN body that oversees this, is that they can have visiting missions dispatched to any of the 17 to assess the progress of decolonization on the ground. Now, in the BVI case, we had one such visit in 1976. And at that time, we were, of course, very underdeveloped, but still growing. And we determined that we would continue to work on our economic development and developing our political institutions. And we will consider in due course what our next steps would be in terms of self-determination. In 2024, we had the second visiting mission in our history dispatched by the UN Special Committee on Decolonization.
Okay.
And out of that visiting mission, there was a report on the BVI. The report talked about the progress of decolonization and made a number of recommendations.
Okay.
The recommendations were as follows. One, the BVI should have an education program on self-determination to ensure that people are fully aware of what is involved. Two, a timetable for independence, because based on their findings, the UN's view is that the BVI is ready for independence.
Ooh.
Three, the BVI should negotiate for full internal self-government from the UK, that we should not be overseen in part by a governor, but that our own leaders should have full responsibility for running our society, the affairs of state. And then finally, an arbitrator to be appointed between by the UN to engage both the BVI and the UK on the next steps, which would involve a referendum, if required, for the people to decide their future. Those are the recommendations. Now, we welcome the report. We were very happy that the UN's findings reflected what many of us thought was the case, which it is, which is that we have developed to the point where we don't need anyone, sitting over us indefinitely. We pay for ourselves. We fund ourselves. The UK does not do that much for us in terms of our internal management, our internal affairs. Yes, they assist with internal security, but that is not something that's beyond the BVI government to manage. In fact, we fund all of the areas that the governor is responsible for in the BVI. BVI government funds it. The police are funded by the BVI. The public service is funded by the BVI government, and courts. So we do all these things ourselves already. It's just that we pay for it and someone's in charge of it, somebody else, right? So what the UN found is that you could do this yourself. You really can. Because in the case of other Caribbean countries, and you talked about St. Kitts and Nevis in 1983 as the last, we are in a much better position than any of those previous colonies that became independent in the Caribbean. We are stronger economically and politically than any of them were.
So if you think about the next 10 years ahead for BVI, where you have this second visit by the UN just under 2 years ago, and they listed some recommendations around educating people around what self-determination is all about, possibly having a referendum, etc., etc. Can you give us an idea, like let's take a 5-year horizon or a 10-year horizon, whichever you want, and tell us what that's going to look like for BVI in terms of the sort of concrete measures being taken towards self-determination?
Okay. We are overdue for a constitutional review, which is an upgrade of our constitution.
Right.
They're supposed to happen every 10 years or so in terms of how the UK operates. But we have been delayed because of the hurricane in 2017 and other things. So we're overdue.
Okay.
So we had this visiting mission, but we also had a constitutional review process that we were undertaking, in which we produced a report, and that report made a number of recommendations, one of which is a decolonization commission that goes up that will handle the education program that was recommended.
Right.
But in addition to that, our parliament formed a committee to look at the next steps for negotiating a new constitution and the question of self-determination. And essentially they have agreed, which will be published very soon in their report, that we will request a referendum on a change of political status in 2031.
So the referendum will be held in 2031.
That is the plan.
Okay. 5
as it
years.
stands now.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, a report will be published soon that reflects this.
Okay.
But the people of the BVI will have the opportunity, they will have their say on what they want their political future to look like. And central to that is self determination.
Mm-hmm.
We must be fully decolonized. That is the goal. And full decolonization, which is the mandate of the C24 at the UN, which is the UN Special Committee on Decolonization, that is the mandate. And it's the mandate because the international community determined in 1960 that all forms of colonization should be eradicated in
Hmm.
every, it must come to an end. And so right now we're in the, I think the fourth decade um, of that the UN has adopted for the eradication of colonialism. So it is a mandate. And so the
Right.
people of CBI will get their say on whether or not they wish to be independent, whether they wish to have a free association with the UK or another state, or if they want to integrate with the UK or another state. But the current situation, the status quo,
Mm-hmm.
is a colonial situation. So we cannot remain as we are because that's not decolonization. That's remaining a colony.
Right. Right.
And regardless of how advanced in self-governance we are, the fact remains that there's a governor that sits in Road Town in the British Virgin Islands, and he has the authority and the power to pull the plug on democracy from us if he wants to, or to intervene if he feels he wants to. So we don't want to
Mm-hmm.
have a political system where any one person has that power over our people and our society. If we are going to have governance where there are measures such as that, let it be under our own oversight as opposed to
Yes.
someone else.
Okay. So we have a 5 year horizon for this decision to be made. And in the interim, lots of education and lots of debate, I'm guessing, but also lots of preparation from an economic standpoint, I would imagine. I mean, not that you get, like you outlined, you don't get financial support from the UK, but you would not have, for example, your border patrols and certain other things that are provided now. You would have to fund these on your own. Um, but let's talk a little bit about
Let
the
me,
economy of the
before you
BVI.
move on from there,
Sure,
let me just
sure,
mention a few things.
of course.
If the BVI were to become independent or be in a free association with the UK, for example, it doesn't mean we're going to break the relationship. It just
Mm-hmm.
means that the partnership will be different.
Yeah,
It will be more balanced and fair. It's not going to be equal because, of course, power always makes things unequal. But we would not say we're going to just, sever the relationship altogether. The
right,
UK can be a good partner.
right.
We think so. We have problems with the way things function now, but that is because of the unilateral authority that they have over us, which makes the situation difficult when they seek to impose things as opposed to consult or allow us to make the decision.
Mm-hmm.
So we would be happy to have a relationship with the UK going forward, one where that involves defense, for example. We do have hurricanes.
Yes,
We see that Dominica got assistance from the UK when they were hit by Hurricane Maria because they have a partnership via the Commonwealth. We
yes,
would want to be a part of the Commonwealth and continue to engage on economic and other matters, in climate change, all of these things. So I just want to be clear that we in the Virgin Islands, our people, the point is not to just throw away the UK because we just don't like them because they were colonizers.
mm-hmm.
The issue is that we are people in our own right. We have our own unique
Yeah,
identity,
yeah.
and we have a right to govern ourselves. And that
If
is
you
the
want
main,
to, yeah.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
we've been doing that for some time, and we pay for ourselves. And it's a very difficult thing that when you pay all your own bills and you take care of yourself, that someone else tells you what to do, even with the money that you're earning. It's very
Yeah, I
hard.
remember having, I mean, not that I'm trying to trivialize your situation. This reminds me of a time when I bought my first car and then my dad tried to tell me where I could go with it. You know, I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
25 and I have my own car. So yeah, no, I get it. And especially if there is minimal, I mean, sort of value add.
Yes.
um, I guess what I'm hearing from you is not that you want to entirely sever a relationship, but you want more balance and more respect, I guess, from the UK, which I suppose anybody could understand. So I appreciate that. But I wanted to switch a little bit and talk about the economy and the way that the BVI economy is structured, where, for example, the two largest sectors are tourism, which you have a very a thriving tourism sector that's mostly based on marine activity, as opposed to where most of us in the Caribbean, it's large hotels and so on. So when I spent some time in BVI last year, I was quite amazed at the amount of vessels on the water in Tortola and around Tortola. So you do have a thriving tourism sector, and you also have a financial services sector. Now, when you look at the financial services sector in the British Virgin Islands, there is that, and this is something that I've written a lot about and talked a lot about in terms of how small jurisdictions get branded as quote unquote tax havens and financial secrecy jurisdictions, for example, where there are other jurisdictions that offer similar services, but they don't ever get listed or blacklisted or branded the way that small islands do or small countries do. So I want to cite the Tax Justice Network. The Tax Justice Network has a financial secrecy index. And the number one country on the financial secrecy index, and this is updated as of June last year, the number one country is the United States, followed by Switzerland, Singapore, Hong Kong, Luxembourg, Germany, the Netherlands, South Korea, Guernsey, Japan, Taiwan, China, the United Arab Emirates, Ireland. Panama is number 15. And number 16 is the British Virgin Islands, which is the number one in the Caribbean on this list. And then there is another list called the Corporate Tax Haven Index, the world's largest enablers of corporate tax abuse. And this is updated as of December last year. And guess who's number one on the list? The British Virgin Islands. And then after, you have the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, Bermuda, Singapore, Hong Kong, Netherlands, Jersey, Ireland, and Luxembourg, just to call out the top 10. So BVI and Cayman are on the top of the corporate tax abuse list. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what are the implications from an economic standpoint for the BVI, should you choose to, in 5 years, choose self-determination. What are the likely implications? But also talk to me about this reputation and this listing of BVI as a corporate tax abuse enabler. How do you respond to that?
Well, firstly, Tax Justice Network, I understand the work that they do, and I don't want to diminish it in any way. But quite frankly, they are not the international or global standard setters in this area. It
Okay.
is at this point, the OECD. And the OECD has a rating system that they use, which is supposed to consider all of the jurisdictions of the world. And the BVI has had largely compliant ratings for quite some time.
And this is with
So
the tax structure that the OECD has prescribed. You have, I mean, we don't want to get technical, but you have Pillar 1, Pillar 2, etc. Right?
right, they have a base erosion and shifting initiative to
Yes.
try to reform the national tax system, and they
Yes.
have options to do that. But I'm just saying that Tax Justice Network, yes, they're an NGO and they have their place and role, but as a government, we look at the standards set and the ratings issued by the OECD. And as
Right.
far as we are concerned, based on that, we have done reasonably well.
And you said that
Now,
your rating is largely compliant according to the OECD.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
and for quite some time, it's been like that. I mean, we've had maybe some gaps in between, but largely so. And
Okay.
where I think we've only had some challenges in recent years after the hurricanes devastated the islands, where it was a bit difficult to get back on our feet. But
Mm-hmm.
since then, we have, and I think the international standard-setting bodies, the OECD, the FATF, and the EU, all recognize that we had to work our way back to a functioning society after the hurricanes and needed a bit more time to catch up on
Mm-hmm.
our obligations. But we're there. We're
Right.
working, and we continue to work to meet the international standards even as they evolve. And so
Right.
that is how we see ourselves, that's how we judge ourselves. Um, the the problem that I have with the way Tax Justice Network and some other organizations as well is that they overly focus and fixate on small jurisdictions like the BVI. And they do so because it seems that we are low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
It seems that they believe, well, since you all aren't fully independent and you have a somewhat of a colonial status, they can focus their efforts there and then seek to pressure the UK to
Mm.
clamp down on us using very colonial means. And that is one of the serious problems I have with Tax Justice Network. They talk about justice, that's a part of their name, but they
Yeah.
don't see how the colonial impositions that they are recommending are against
Mm.
natural justice, against our humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I find very problematic as a BVI lander who grew up there, has family there, is that they treat the BVI and describe the BVI in this way where there are no people. It's almost just like a bunch of, bank accounts,
Yeah.
post boxes, and accountants' offices there, and that's
Yeah.
all that exists on the island. We have a thriving community there,
Yeah.
historical community, and financial services accounts for 2/3 of the government budget. Financial
Yes.
services revenue. And that revenue is what funds all of the teachers and the doctors and the policemen and the nurses, right? And all of the infrastructure that we do have. It has
Right.
helped lift our people out of uh, poverty many years ago and into what I would describe as a very high standard of living and quality of life relative to many other places. So, it's one thing to cast aspersions on the BVI, which we see Tax Justice Network doing. But the other side of the picture is that financial services has benefited us tremendously as a society. And those who criticize it, they never talk about alternatives to how we would live and support ourselves if this sector was to go away.
Right. And so that's one of the things that I guess troubles me about the idea of independence or self-determination. Do you think that there will be any impact to this sector or to the tourism sector as well? Do you think that there could be a negative economic impact if you choose to go for self-determination?
Yeah. Right now, company and corporations, at least for 2025, were up 12% over 2024.
Okay.
And that is because of the certainty that the BVI provides to, to the international business community. It is because we have a strong foundation in English common law. We have very good courts that have appeal right up to the Privy Council, and the corporate vehicles that we have can facilitate cross-border investment and partnerships very easily.
Okay.
So this is why business is up. The biggest threat to our business, the biggest source of instability to our sector, is when UK parliamentarians, specific ones, who do not agree with our business model, and when they are supported by Tax Justice Network and others, the inflammatory comments that they make that seek to scare the international business community away so that they will not do business with us. That's the biggest threat. The ability of the UK government to interfere is the biggest threat. So when you talk about self-determination or independence, in the current situation is the biggest threat to our financial services industry right now.
So you see your risks declining.
Yes, the risk right now to us is high. I mean, I'm not sure if you picked this up in the news, but you have UK MPs saying openly in the public that if the BVI does not comply with what they want, they will make life miserable for us. Right?
They've made this threat publicly.
Yes, you can go online, you can look at the UK Parliament website. They've said it's the last chance for us to do as they say, or they're going to take parliamentary action, which means an order in council or something draconian. And why do they feel they can do that? Because of the colonial situation. They feel that they can interfere. Now, let me just say one more thing about this, Marla, which I think is very important.
For sure.
Tax Justice Network and others, some of these UK parliamentarians, they treat BVI, Cayman, Bermuda, and the Caribbean territories in one way and have a separate standard for the way that they treat the crown dependencies of Jersey, Guernsey, and the Isle of Man. The kind of threats that they lob at the BVI, they did not do. They don't have make those same threats to Jersey. They don't make them to Guernsey or Isle of Man. They don't do it. And it's the same line of business. We're in the same line of business. No, I have been very direct about this. Is it because we're Caribbean? Is it because we are of African heritage?
Yeah.
Is that the reason why? Is there an assumption that since the people in Jersey and Guernsey and Isle of Man are of European extract, that they're more trustworthy than we are? Is that it? And I would like those parliamentarians in the UK that continue to threaten us, but not threaten them, and Tax Justice Network and others who continue to call for the UK to take action against us of a colonial nature. I would like them to tell us, is it because we are from the Caribbean? Is it because we have African heritage? Are those the reasons why, versus the very soft and gentle treatment that is received by these other jurisdictions within the so-called UK family?
Right.
What is it? They have to tell us. I just begin to wonder after the constant attacks, and you see the difference in the way that they deal with the crown dependencies versus the overseas territories.
Because there is this push for the beneficial ownership register to be open, and I know that this came up in the Cayman Islands as well, where the overseas territories have a position that, you know, once the UK does their bit, then the overseas territories will do theirs. But then there is also this sort of criticism of and fear that you make this registry of ultimate beneficial ownership open, and that can put certain people at risk. Where the stance of the Cayman Islands, for example, is that if a legitimate query comes in, we have a standard of responding within 24 hours. If it's a legitimate query, meaning from another country's authorities or, you know, a legal firm and things like that, or regulators and things like tax authorities and so on. But like, I can't like I shouldn't be able to go to the Cayman Islands and say I want to find out who owns this asset here or that property there, or tell me what does this person have in their portfolio, simply because of the kind of risks to people's safety, security, privacy, etc. What is your take on all of that?
Yeah, well, there is a measure of transparency that is, I think, useful, and that begins with law enforcement. So, in the case of the BVI and the other overseas territories and the Crown dependencies, they signed an exchange of notes on beneficial ownership exchange with the UK in 2016. So,
Right.
UK law enforcement has direct access or immediate access to any information on ultimate beneficial owners that they request from these jurisdictions. They
Right.
will get it from, it can be as soon as an hour, even sooner than that, but certainly within 24 hours.
And the
And
BVI has that standard as well.
it's in place, it's already in place. It's been in place since 2016.
Okay.
And we have a system that provides that information very quickly. So the UK law enforcement has this in place right now. So
Right.
that is, the issue is not about law enforcement because they have the access. The
Mm-hmm.
issue is that there are other parties, such as journalists and civil society, who also want that access.
Right.
Now, the issue around access is and data protection is a human rights question. The
Hmm.
European um, Court of Justice did
Yes.
have a decision just a few
That
years
was
ago.
last year or the year
Yeah,
before. Yeah.
year before that, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
2024, I believe,
For.
where
Mm-hmm.
you said, look, you cannot have an open register where any and everyone can just go in, see people's data, their personal information, where they live, their date of birth. These things, they said that's a human rights violation, and the EU's own human rights convention is what that's based on.
Right.
So the idea that you could have just had an open registry was flawed all along, which we had said for a number of times. We both said that law enforcement has a legitimate right to the information, especially if it's conducting an investigation. But other parties, there is an issue there. Now, the compromise that we have reached is that there, and which is what the European Court of Justice also mentioned, which is that there are others beside law enforcement who have a legitimate interest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Tax authorities, for example.
yes, exactly. So
Mm-hmm.
even some research institutions and others. So our system is similar to Cayman. They've set up a legitimate interest register where each application that's made has to demonstrate on its own merits that there's a legitimate interest.
Mm-hmm.
If that can be demonstrated, you will get the information you request. But we are not going to give it to you just on the basis that you're a journalist and you automatically should have access. No, the
Right.
UK's trust register doesn't operate that way.
Right. So that's a double standard, is it?
Exactly. It's a
Mm-hmm.
double standard and they know it. Uh, the trust register they have, you can't just have open access to by anyone. You can't just allow journalists to go in as they please. You have to submit requests individually, right? And it will
Mm-hmm.
be taken on its own merit. And once that one case is, if it's granted or access, and you want to look at something else, then you have to come back and apply again. And that is the
Mm.
best safeguard to ensure people's data and their privacy is protected. If you go any further, it's a violation. Marla,
Yeah.
how would you feel if I was able to walk into a bank and
Mm-hmm.
say, can you please give me all of the information on Marla Dukharan? I mean, the bank will say, well, why should we give it to you?
Yeah.
And so the question is, why do the various UK MPs, civil society folks, and others, why are they insisting that they have the right to just have access to this information? They are not law enforcement. And
Yeah,
just by the way,
what would they want to do with it?
well, there's a few things. One, they will say that they think the public interest, right, is at stake and they should be given. Okay, well, do they get to determine what's in the public interest?
Public interest, yeah, yeah.
Right? That's why we have courts.
Mm.
Courts, or that's
Mm.
why we may have an information commissioner or someone like that, some authority that's been appointed to say. We can't leave it to a journalist or civil society to say.
Yeah,
That's going to be a direct violation of the individual rights, the liberties that persons have in society. So these things have to be balanced. I am not against wanting, you know, financial crime, economic crime, corruption, these issues to be addressed. I'm all for it. But law
yes,
enforcement is there for a reason. They are there to tackle those issues. If a journalist has a tip or information, give it to law enforcement,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
As
Mm.
opposed to saying, well, I want the information so that we can publish it in a paper. Well, do you want to do that just to attract customers and you get more papers sold, or is it in the public interest? That who
Yeah,
gets to decide? There's a commercial interest there that's competing with the public interest, and this is why these are matters for law enforcement and judges. They must be the one. But again, as we talked about here, if you can demonstrate a legitimate interest, if you can, then the
you'll
authorities, the
get the
BVI,
information. Yeah.
will not have a problem giving it to you.
So we had a few comments and questions come in, and I just want to handle one of them before we will have to wrap up. And the question was directed to the Cayman Islands, or I should say in reference to the Cayman Islands, and whether if they were to receive their, or sorry, if they were to agitate for and get their self-determination or independence, how would that affect their currency? But one interesting note is that the BVI, you all are dollarized, right? You use the US dollar as your official currency, yes?
Yes.
Is there any implication for that envisioned in this journey that you're on? Or are you all quite happy keeping the US dollar as your legal tender and official currency?
Yeah, we adopted the US dollar as our legal tender because our neighbors are the US Virgin Islands and
Yes.
Puerto Rico, and we import most of our goods from the US. So, as a practical matter, it makes sense to maintain the US dollar. And that's not, whether we keep the currency or not, has nothing to do with the self-determination process. That's just an economic decision.
Okay,
A
interesting.
country can just decide. There are, I think, 12 countries in the world outside the US that use the US dollar. And that's just a
Yeah.
decision by the government. Yeah. I just should mention, whenever or very often when we talk about self-determination, people ask the question, and many questions, are we ready? What if we lose this? What if we lose that? They think of the worst that could happen.
Right.
They don't think about what the best of what can happen, right? And
we're humans. We want to prepare for whatever risks we're going to face.
Yes, but you have to see it from both sides. You have to have, you can see what the drawbacks would be, but you should also see what would be the benefits. And for me, as someone who's worked on UK BVI issues for a long time, I can see the benefits in terms of not having to deal with the back and forth on, what we do with our economy, what we do with financial services. I mean, why is it that MPs and journalists who have never even visited the BVI can be saying the things that they say and trying to determine for us what our future will be? No, we must determine our future. And I don't think that we will get the fairness and respect that we deserve unless we have a different relationship with the UK and unless we take our self-determination to the next level.
I support that view. I feel like unless the relationship is balanced and respectful, then you are obviously going to be put at a disadvantage. I mean, my own view, from what I see in the Cayman Islands, it looks to me like, for example, like they seem to have a relationship that is stable and positive. That could just be my view. I'm not sure. I see it as a stable and positive relationship. I'm guessing the relationship in the BVI is not necessarily as stable and positive, which is unfortunate.
Strained. Yeah, our relationship has been strained for the past nearly a decade, and it has been strained over the tug of war between the UK and the BVI because of this colonial versus democratic governance.
Right.
And BVI people are very, very protective of their autonomy.
Right.
Let me just point out something else that's unique about us. Relative to Cayman, Bermuda, BVI landers own most of the land in BVI. They own most of the local businesses in BVI. They have great control over the economy.
Right.
And they will protect that with everything that they have, because we are very well aware of where we came from, how poor our parents were when they grew up, and our grandparents and great-grandparents. We have fought very hard to get where we are today. And we do not want to be in a position where we are vulnerable to somebody else, someone in London, changing that.
Yeah.
So we need to take steps to make sure that we can protect our society and not be subject to the whims of the UK Parliament or the UK government if they decide they want to behave in an imperial fashion as opposed to a democratic one.
Yes, I hear you. And we have, with the 2 minutes we have left, Benito, we started the program talking about freedoms and that development is constitutive of freedom and vice versa. So for the BVI to progressively remove the unfreedoms that you currently deal with, what would be the order of priorities in your view in 2 minutes?
First, we are going to negotiate a new constitution with the UK this year. In that constitution, we will be seeking full internal self-government. We would like to have control over those remaining areas that are not under our own ministers and premier. The governor controls the public service, internal security, administration, courts, and the UK is responsible for external defense. At the very least, we want areas that the governor has under his control. Thereafter, we wish to have a referendum on our future political status. Give the people of the BVI a say. Let them decide what they would like to do. But we cannot stay as we are. We have to be fully decolonized. And then in the interim, we must have a very strong education program on self-determination. We understand all of the dimensions of it, the liabilities, the risks, but also all of the positive benefits that can come from being either in a free association or independent. And this is what we have to do for our children and grandchildren. We are a people in our own right. We have our own unique identity based on our culture.
Yes.
We don't want to lose it. In fact, we want to build a society on it on our own terms and not have our future determined by people elsewhere in the UK, in London. Right to it, and we're going to follow up on that right.
Wonderful. I couldn't have said it better myself. Well said, Benito. And I just want to thank you for making the time to come on this show and discuss this important matter for the people of BVI with us, because I think this is not an issue that gets enough attention in the Caribbean. And this is a very important and unique journey that you're on in a Caribbean context. So I really appreciate that you've come to share all of these insights with us. Thank you. And I wish you and the people of the BVI the best of luck on this journey. Godspeed.
Thank you very much, Marla. And I want to commend you on all your advocacy on behalf of the Caribbean. You are an amazing advocate and economist, and we greatly value you. I hope to see you in the BVI sometime soon.
For sure. Thank you. Have a lovely weekend, Benito. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You too.